So the topic today is mastering the powerful close, and I say it's a fun or fascinating presentation because I've never actually, in all my years of showing people how to sell, teaching people how to sell, talking about selling, done a presentation on closing before. Never, not even once, not even with paying clients, believe it or not. Obviously, I've worked with clients one-on-one and coaching in terms of helping them close opportunities, helping them close deals, but I've never done a full-on deck for it, and there's a reason for that. The word doesn't work for me. I really don't like the word or the concept of closing, right? A lot of folks on this call and a lot of folks in my audience have come in or been introduced to my work through my cold calling playbook, which is one of my lead magnets, as we call them. And, not surprisingly, I get a lot of emails saying, hey, that was great, but can you teach me how to close? And my response has always been, no, because there really is no such thing as closing. Closing doesn't exist. You don't close anything, and I've never really expanded on it. So this is not a presentation on closing, and don't get upset because I think you'll get just as much out of it. In fact, even more. I really prefer the concept of consummation, right? And I'll go into a little more detail, but the word consummation, if you look it up, really means to complete an arrangement, right? Complete an arrangement or agreement. There's another connotation of consummation. Whoops, sorry about that. Let's pop that back up, which is it's connoting a union versus doing something to somebody else, and it also connotes perfection. Connotation of the word connote means what's the meaning behind the word, right? In case I'm using too fancy of a word, but when you say to consummate a relationship, right, it means to bring into union. The most common use of it, of course, is with respect to marriage and what happens on the wedding night. But consummate as an adjective is also a word that means perfect, right? The consummate gentleman, the consummate scholar. So I really love the word to consummate as a way of thinking about how we bring an opportunity to a conclusion with our prospects, right? Much better than closing a deal or a close date. Here's the problem with closing, right? The word close means to bring to an end, right? It's done. It's the end. It's stopped. However, closing the sale is actually not something the prospect cares about. I've written a bunch of posts about this, that a sales process that aligns around this concept of a close date, right? And we talk about the close date, when's it going to close. If we went over to the prospect who we were talking to, who we were working with, and said, hey, so what's the close date of this deal? They would look at you like you were crazy. What do you mean close date? We don't know about a close date. For the prospect, right, the thing that we think of as contract signing is, maybe the end of the sale, but for them it's the beginning of what they actually start to care about, which is getting value out of what they've spent money on. So the whole concept of closing to me seems incredibly selfish, one-sided, and really out of the spirit of how you can move powerfully through the profession of selling. We talk about what's your sales process. We talk about what's the buying process. In reality, the prospect doesn't care about our process, right? When I go and work with a company, I say, so what's your sales process? What I get is a lot of steps. We cold call, we do a demo, we give a proposal, we send contracts, right? That stuff we do. That's not really anything that in any way represents a collaborative relationship with a prospect with whom we're trying to do business with. And then on the other side of the coin, what we would call the buying process, and right, one of the things that's sort of in vogue these days is to try to align our selling process to the buyer's buying process. Well, when you peel back the onion on the buyer side, what you find is half the time the buyers don't even know what their buying process actually is. Right? They know sort of vaguely, well, I got to talk to this guy or this woman's involved or they're a stakeholder, but they don't have anything in the way of a formal process. I mean, obviously large companies have procurement processes. That's very different than what we think of as the buying process, what gets the buyer to a decision to buy or not to buy. And we'll talk about this ad nauseum here. It's going to be fun. So this is my sales and buying process nonsense slide, and for me it really illustrates the problem that we're dealing with, right? It really illustrates the dysfunction here, and that is, here we are on one side of the world with our, sometimes secret and almost always self-serving sales process. There's alliteration for you. And then on the other side is the buyer with their informal or undefined buying process. I use the word sales twice, so sorry about that. Where we meet in the middle is where, quote unquote, the deal gets done. But the problem is that there's really very little overlap, right? The chance of a successful outcome, meaning they get something of ours of value and give us money in exchange, right, which is the outcome that, in theory, both parties should want, is actually a rare occurrence, right? You hear all these statistics about, X% of opportunities end in no decision. Well, it's not surprising, right? We're walking around with a dysfunctional sales process trying to sell into a dysfunctional or completely, opaque buying process. And, the reality is it's very hard to come together on that. So we're gonna talk about how we can fix that. So let's talk about selling. Selling and of course buying, right, in my view, represents the consummation of a process, right? It's the coming together at the end of a process. It's actually not a thing in itself, right? The sale, the buy, the deal, whatever, is what happens at the end. It's not the means to an end, it is the end, right? Ultimately, selling and buying happens at a moment in time when the prospect makes a decision to buy or not to buy. A lot of stuff goes on, but at the end of the day, there is a decision to buy or not, right? Both a decision to buy and a decision not to buy are possible outcomes and results of this thing we call selling. By the way, do nothing is also a possible outcome, right? However, decision process may exist or may not, but when you really, really think about it, right, the concept of a decision, whether or not the process is transparent or opaque, known or unknown, vague or specific, the decision is a moment in time, right? Think about our own lives. We decide to do things. It may take us a year, but the decision happens in an instant, right? Sometimes we make snap decisions, buy a candy bar at the grocery store. Sometimes we deliberate, right? And this is what I've been thinking about now for more than a year as I've been kind of churning on this concept of what is selling, what is closing. We can talk all we want about our process. We can talk about theirs, ours, but it all comes down to a single moment in time where the prospect makes a decision to buy or not to buy, right? It's actually kind of simple. So you get a room full of people, and if you guys all had your microphones unmuted, I would say, so sales is about, right, when I've done this in the room, everybody says the same thing. Relationships, right? It's like a big chorus, right? Sales is about relationships, right? Relationships that are going to get the deal done, what have you. The problem is when I probe and I say, well, what is this thing called a relationship, right? We use the word. Every deal I've ever looked at, the salesperson I'm evaluating or in a pipeline says, oh, I got a great relationship with the prospect. We use it sort of like a drumbeat. And then you say, well, what is a relationship, really? And you get a lot of fuzzy answers. That's when everybody sort of starts mumbling and saying funny things. So let's talk about what a relationship is in the context of the dictionary, right? When you go to the dictionary and you say, look at relationship, so what it says, a relationship is a way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected. That sounds pretty straightforward. That actually makes sense to me, right? Now we have a definition of relationship. Well, let's check that, right? Let's go see if it holds up, because there's this word connected there, and I want to make sure I just understand what that means, because I think I know what it means, but let me check, right? When I go look up connection, I run smack dab into a problem, right? A connection is a relationship in which blah, 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 blah is linked or associated with something else. So relationship just defined itself by using itself as a definition, right? It's called a circular reference. That's a problem. Well, maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe this word linked, provides a clue, right? Because it's a new word in there. When I go to linked, it says to make, form, or suggest a connection. I'm right back where I started. So we got this word that, 2,000 people in a room will agree is the essence of selling, yet I can't even look in the dictionary and figure out what the heck it means. That's a little concerning. As it turns out, when we get away from the dictionary and we get a bunch of people in the room, we say, well, let's just talk about it. Let's come up with our own definition. Let's agree on something. This is actually an easel pad from a workshop that I attended. And, in about 10 minutes with probably less than 10 people in the room, we had a giant paper full of gobbledygook, right? Everybody had a different definition. So we have a problem here, folks. We have a real underlying problem in the whole dance that we call selling, and that is this thing that we believe is the underpinning of everything that works, of everything that matters, actually has no meaning. And that's a problem, at least according to me. So I believe that the path to moving beyond the dysfunction of selling is something we do to somebody, a prospect, something we subject them to, and moving towards something we work together to consummate. I believe the path to that, the solution lies in redefining this word that there really is no agreement, frankly, no definition on. And that's what we're going to set about trying to do. Here's the funny part, right? I do this thing in the room, right, when I say what's a relationship and I get a bunch of mumbles. When I put this up here and I say, what is a chair, pretty much everybody agrees it's something you sit in. So this thing that, matters has meaning, import, all sorts of significance in terms of, not only our professional careers as salespeople, but frankly our lives, is almost impossible to define in agreement. But this thing we put our butts in all day, we get pretty good. So that's a little ironic. Let's see if we can do better. Now, the question I'm asking, which you guys can feel free to text your answers in, is what are these kids doing, right? When you see kids running around in the grass, holding hands, jumping, running, whatever, what are they doing? Somebody send me a little comment. Hey, look, viewer 23 says playing, right? These kids are at play. We can tell by the joy in their faces running around. So what's funny, you could do this in almost any language in any country of the world, and you get the same answers. That's kind of cool. We're going to hold on to that thought. Now, what happens when one of the kids says, hey, here's the deal. I'm going to be it. And if I find you, you're caught, but I'm going to hide behind a tree. I'm going to close my eyes for 30 seconds. I'm going to count to 30, and you guys all had to find you, right? When we do this, right, when this starts to occur, what is this called? Right? Somebody put an answer up there. What are these kids doing? What's happening here? Come on, somebody. Boom. Yeah, game, hide and seek, trust. Interesting. I don't really know what that means, but these kids are now playing a game, right? The difference between the previous slide, right, is these kids are just running around having fun playing. These kids are still having fun running around, but they've actually chosen to engage in what's called a game, right? So there's a difference we all know inherently, intuitively, between play and game. Again, I can go to any country in the world in any language and show these same pictures, and some people get fancy saying things like trust, etc., whatever. That's a joke. But at the end of the day, we all know the difference between play and game. So what if we thought about this concept of relationships in such simple terms, right? So we know that games don't have rules. They are the rules, right? Play means no rules. We're just doing stuff. When somebody articulates a bunch of rules and everybody agrees to follow the rules, we are now in a game. Now, notice what I said. I said games don't have rules. They are rules. Basketball is a game that happens when two teams of 5 people go on a wood floor with a rubber ball with baskets on each side and agree to play by a set of rules. Now, I know that there's a rule book for basketball, so I'm being a little, cheeky here, but the idea is a game exists because of the rules that people agree to play by. Right now, I'm not good at basketball. I'm not really good at this thing where you bounce the ball while you're walking, right? Called dribbling, I think. So when Townsend plays basketball, he carries the ball, he holds it, and he walks or he runs. The problem is Townsend's not playing basketball. I'm not playing basketball. I'm playing Townsend ball, right? Basketball is a function of the rules that make up the game. When you play by the rules, you're playing the game, right? Hide and seek, right, happens because the person who's the seeker counts to 30, closes their eyes. If they only count to 10 and they're peeking the whole time, well, they're breaking the rules. They're not playing hide and seek. They're playing something else. Right? You could say they're cheating. You could say, whatever. But at the end of the day, they have exited the game of hide and seek and entered some other state. More on that in a minute. Let's carry this thought and say that just as a game is a function of the rules that we agree to play, what if a relationship were merely a function of the rules that the people engaged in the relationship agree them to be, right? Now, of course, we don't call them rules in a relationship. I can't imagine going home to my significant other and saying, you broke the rules, or, here's the new rule in the house, or what have you. I mean, you could do that. It's not going to go over very well. But in a relationship, we actually refer to commitments, right? So we can be said to be in a relationship when we make and accept commitments between two people. The people who are engaged in those commitments are, as such, part of that relationship. Let's keep going. We need to think a little bit about this term commitments, just like rules, right? One of the things I do when I'm doing this in person is I'll run up to somebody, literally sitting there in an auditorium, and I'll touch them. I'll go, tag, you're it, and I'll run away. Well, what did I just do? I applied a rule of a game that person had no idea they were playing. They're in a conference listening to me speak, taking notes, and I just tagged them, right? That's pretty bizarre. But in relationships, that's what we do a lot of times. We create these commitments in our head that are never shared with the other party. And by the way, yes, I am talking about personal relationships, business relationships, all relationships. So we need to be specific about what is a commitment and what is not, right? Just like what is a rule, what is not. Commitments have to be bi-directional, right? When we use the word commitment, a lot of times we'll say things like, Yuri, I need you to commit to close this deal by the end of the quarter, right? Well, that's called a commitment under duress, right? Or I'll fire you, right? Would be the punchline there. Yes, you can say that, but in truth, a commitment must be bi-directional, which means it must be offered and accepted or requested and agreed to. You cannot be said to be in a commitment that you haven't agreed to do. Now, somebody can have an expectation for you, right? I expect you to do this, and a consequence, I'll fire you if you don't. That's very different than a commitment. A commitment ultimately has to be voluntary for it to be a real commitment, right? Expectations are one way, and by the way, expectations are often hidden, right? Gosh, I expected that they would just wear a suit today. Never talked about it, never asked them to, but I expected they would. Commitments have to be stated, have to be formal, and agreed to in order to be real. Now, we could play a semantic game and argue, and people have different definitions, but what I'm asking you to do is, for the purpose of this conversation, let's agree that as games have rules that everybody must agree to play to be in that game, relationships have commitments that both or all parties need to know and agree to be said to be in, relationship, to be in that commitment, right? Now, one last item here. You cannot commit to outcomes. You can commit to actions, but at the end of the day, none of us controls the future. None of us controls outcomes. So commitments to outcomes really are not commitments. I promise that, I'll hit my quota this year. Well, or I commit to hitting my quota. You can't do that. You can commit to actions, calls, setting meetings, attending meetings, right? Things that are in your control. You can certainly offer a commitment to an outcome, but by my definition, at least, it's not a real commitment. It's not really something you can be held accountable to, although lots of people try, don't they? They try to either make commitments to things that are out of their control or get other people to commit to them. But if you really look at it, carefully, you have to admit that that's not a functional way to exist. So let's say a relationship is a function of the commitments, bi-directional commitments, accepted commitments, stated commitments, formal commitments that the parties make. That's part of it. So now we can move from relationship as this ethereal, fuzzy thing, it's a series of connections, it's how you feel, right, to something very simple. And I would propose that the concept of a relationship is a binary state. You are either in relationship, gray circle, or you're not in relationship. If you and another sentient being, a human, have a mutual commitment that has been stated and accepted, you can be said to be in relationship. Not in a relationship, but in relationship. So what we're really doing is proposing that the concept of relationship is a state, right? Like water. Water is actually H2O, the molecule. It can be a liquid, which is water, still H2O. It can be a solid, ice, still H2O. It can be a vapor, gas, still H2O, right? It's always water, but the state changes. So you are always you. The other person is always the other person. You are either in the state of in relationship or the state of not in relationship. And the way you know is if you have a commitment. So if you have a commitment with another human being, you are in a relationship. I am in a relationship, not in a relationship, in relationship with everybody in this call. I made a commitment to show up here at 10:30 Mountain Time and talk to you for about an hour. You guys made a commitment to show up as well, right? Now, when I hang up the line and you guys wander off, we move from in relationship to not in relationship because there's no commitment there, right? It's not a good thing or a bad thing, and that actually brings up a really good point, right? What does in relationship mean, right? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it right? Is it wrong? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a state. It's just a concept, right? If you are in relationship with somebody, you have commitments. If you are not in relationship, you do not have commitments with them. It's very simple. Being in relationship is not better than not being in relationship, just as play is not better than game, right? We sort of know as kids, play and game are just different. Sometimes we want to play, sometimes we want to get in a game. So once we remove this value judgment of you have to be in a good relationship or a strong relationship or a growing relationship, we simply say it's a state, things get a lot easier. Either you're in relationship or you are not. Where's this going? Let's go back to process for a second, right? I showed you this slide already. This is the dysfunction. Again, the purpose today is to give you guys, give everybody in this call, a far more powerful framework to consummate your relationship with your prospects in a positive way that benefits everybody. So what we're trying to do is remove dysfunctions. Talking about relationships as this ethereal, nebulous concept is a dysfunction because we can't make anything happen. Using a process with a very small sliver of a chance of a successful outcome is a dysfunction. It's impedance, it's resistance. It's not bad in a moral sense, it's just not effective, right? So this model doesn't work in terms of sales process, and here's the reason why. Selling, and I'll just use that word for fun, is actually three separate processes. We talk about a sales process, it's nonsense because it's our stuff, our buying process. There are three discrete processes that occur from, the point that we start talking to somebody and the point where they write us a check for something that they want. And these are those processes. There's a decision process, right? A period of time when they make a decision. There's a contracting and procurement process oftentimes, right, where we put something on legal documentation. And there's an implementation process. Now, they are sequential and they are related in that they all happen, but they're really three discrete separate processes that don't have anything to do with each other. One of the most confusing things to me is when a salesperson, as part of the sales process, quote unquote, sends a contract over, right? Why are you sending a contract? Well, so they can make a decision. What the hell does contracting have to do with making a decision? Well, I know the answer, and that is, well, if I put a contract in front of them, they'll have to make a decision one way or the other. I get it, but that's dysfunctional because you're blending processes and you're doing work that doesn't need to be done. It also doesn't really benefit the decision process. Oftentimes what I see is when we send contracts, proposals I'll get to later, but certainly contracts, or when we're talking to procurement, right, it's because we really haven't spent time uncovering the decision process. So we're kind of using contracting as a proxy. How about when companies say, you got to talk to procurement before we talk about even making a decision on anything? That's absolutely absurd. It happens, I know, but it's absurd. It's dysfunctional. So this is how I think about the world of consummating relationships with our prospects. Now, what happens before the decision process? Well, I call it stuff, right? Calls, emails, whatever, trying to get in conversation. Another way to think of it is it's called play, right? We're just playing. Again, when I say play, I don't mean it in a, demeaning sense. Play is fun. It's not structured. It's not driving towards an outcome. It's just fun. But there's stuff that happens. I get it. But at some point, we enter into a decision process, right? And we know it's a decision process because at some point, there is a decision that happens on a decision date, a moment in time. Then there's a contracting process, and I know there's a process because on some point it ends with a contract in my hands that has their signature on it. It has a contract date on it. It's a legal document. Implementation, likewise, is a discrete process because I know that at some point in time, it ends with my software or services, whatever the heck I'm doing, going live or being in use or whatever you want to call it, right? Closing, as we think about it, as hopefully you thought about it coming to this call, and hopefully we'll never think about it again, is actually what lives in here. What we think about closing today is in reality simply the path to a decision date. Interesting. Give me a minute to read this. Maybe even twice. What if, instead of trying to close a sale, what if trying to bring something to an end without trying to do something to somebody, we simply thought of a sale, a deal, a consummation as one possible outcome of a game that we play with our prospects, that's played by both of us, and the game is called Let's Make a Decision, right? Games have rules, relationships have commitments. We can make a game with our prospect, right? Because that's really what it is. It's moving from the unstructured world of play. We're talking, we're showing, we're doing demos, we're taking them to dinner, right? That's play, to quote unquote getting serious. What do I mean by getting serious? I mean, we establish a set of ground rules and we come up with an end point in time that the game ends, right? Because games have a time when the clock runs out. Games have a score. Games know if there's a winner or a loser, a positive outcome, a negative outcome. So instead of trying to close them, what if we invited our prospects to play a game? At a certain moment in time when it seemed appropriate, right, because we can play and do unstructured stuff, but at some point we can say, this has been really cool getting to know you. I'm glad I learned more about your business, blah, 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 blah. I'd like to move from kind of you talking informally about your stuff and what you need, and me talking informally about my stuff and what I think we can do for you, to let's play a game called Make a Decision. More on that in a moment. It's actually a game called your company is going to evaluate our product, service, etc., and make a decision to buy or not to buy. I'd like to invite you to play this game. Why is it important to invite them? Well, like my example, people are often kind of surprised when you walk up and say tag, right? Wasn't aware I was going to be playing a game here today in the conference. Thank you so much, Townsend. Similarly, people tend to pursue a game joyfully, right, with vigor and energy when they are playing willingly of their own desire, right? If you look at all the resistance that occurs, I'm going to go into a bunch of detail about this in about 10 minutes, but if you look at all the resistance that occurs in the sales process, prospects not calling us back, prospects withholding information, et cetera, right? Well, where does that resistance come from? The resistance comes from we're playing a game that we haven't invited them to play. We're playing a game called we want you to buy this stuff. Do you want to buy it? And they may not know that that's the game we're playing. We sort of assume that they would know, right, because we're salespeople, but we're playing a game and they're not part of that game, right? You ever try to force a kid to play a game they don't want to play? It doesn't go well. By the way, sometimes people start playing a game and they go, you know what, I'm sick of playing, I'm tired, I'm going to go home. Sometimes they take their ball with them, right? So, again, I'm using the analogy of play and game, but I'm also actually suggesting that this is a literal and very powerful concept that you can use to engage with your prospects. And I'm going to show you at the end of this presentation, I've got a slide about the results that this process has produced over the last year, working with probably 100 deals, give or take, and frankly, some very junior salespeople, people that have no business selling the size deals they're selling. But this is a very powerful concept, but I also mean that in a literal sense. So how do we ask them? One of the things I always get is, well, okay, I get this concept of play versus game, Townsend, but how do I invite a prospect to play a game? I mean, you don't say it that way, do you? My answer is, of course I do. I say it just like I said it a minute ago. Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, it's been great getting to know you, sharing a little bit about my stuff, doing some demos, etc., meeting your team, talking, whatever. I'd like to move from kind of an informal play construct that we've been in to invite you to play a game called, let's take a serious look at, ABC product or company and make a decision over the next, 2, 3, 4 months. What do you think about playing that game? I literally will ask the prospect, let's play a game. You know why? You know why I don't sugarcoat it? You know why I don't call it some fancy sales language? Because like I said, every human being on earth gets the concept of playing game. I don't have to show them this presentation. I literally just talk about playing game and they go, I get it. And they either say, that sounds great, let's play the game. Or they say, no, I don't want to play a game, I just want to keep playing. And that's fine as well. By the way, you guys can ask questions if you need to. Want to play. I like these comments up here. They're great. So, important note, game, the concept of game, only occurs in relationship, right? Fundamentally, games have rules. Relationship has commitments. I can't play a game without rules. I can't be in a relationship without commitments. Therefore, they're mutually exclusive. I can't be said to be in game with somebody who I'm not in relationship with. If I'm in relationship, I can get into game. If I am in game, I am by definition in relationship. Sounds confusing, doesn't it? Let's talk about it a little more. So once in relationship, right, I can have a commitment. And in my world, the minimum commitment for a relationship and selling is the next scheduled meeting, right? So one of the reasons my methodology focuses so much on get the next scheduled is that is the manifestation, the representation of in relationship, right? If you get somebody to schedule with you, you are in relationship with them, and that allows you access to game. So the reason I say cold calling is only to set the first meeting because then you have a commitment on the calendar, minimum commitment, you're in relationship. Once in that relationship, you can choose to play, right? Unstructured conversation, show the demo, I don't care, do whatever you do. At some point in time, you have the option to invite the prospect to play the game called Let's Make a Decision. You cannot move somebody to game when you're not in relationship with them, right? In relationship gives access to game. If you are not in relationship, it is only play. Very important. If you have questions, please ask. But the reason I say that if you don't even have a next scheduled meeting with the prospect, you are out of relationship. You are not in relationship. Whatever game you're playing, just got a timeout. Really important. We'll keep going and we'll go a little more detail. But first, we need to talk about decision authority, right? Because at the end of the day, you can enter into a game called Make a Decision, but that game is going to end poorly, or at least dysfunctionally, if that person cannot actually make a decision, right? This is where we get into the concept of decision maker. Somebody asked a great question. Would you use the word play with a C-suite executive? I've used this with C-suite executives, and they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like I do, and they get this concept. We were all kids. That's the beauty about it. So whether you're playing or in game, right, when you're not speaking to the person who has authority to make a decision to purchase blank from your company, you have some problems, right? I can't play a game called Make a Decision. I mean, I can, but it's pretty dysfunctional with somebody who does not have the authority to make a decision, right? If you are, quote unquote, playing a game called Make a Decision, which we call selling, but you're not talking to the person who has the authority to make a decision, I've got really bad news for you. You're not actually selling. You're just playing around, right? You're talking to somebody about playing a game that they are not authorized to play. There's no pipeline opportunity, right? One of the requirements for getting to qualified, and I'll show you literally my stage model at the end of this, the very basic requirement for a qualified opportunity, i.e. moving above 0%, is you have to have line of sight to the person of authority. I'll explain person of authority in a minute because it's very important, but the point is, if you're not interacting with the person who has authority to make a decision, you can't play a game called Make a Decision. It's absurd. Yet still, I walk into pipeline reviews with, sales execs who will tell me about an opportunity they're working. They'll call it engaged, committed, whatever. And I'll say, who's the person of authority? They don't know. They've had 3-4 meetings, but they don't know if the person they're talking to has the authority to make a decision. And they may not even know who the person is. Now, we're going to talk a lot about person of authority and what if you can't get to them, et cetera. But let's just assume for a minute that you can always get to the person of authority, which I know you can't, but hold on. If you're not speaking directly with the person who has the authority to make a decision, you can't play a game called Make a Decision. You're only playing. You will never be in game. You may be having a nice conversation. You might as well talk to people at Starbucks, right? And I'll literally say this to sales execs. Take your demo, take your proposal, and go hand it out at Starbucks because you're having about the same level of conversation. If you don't even know who this person is, right, that's a problem. So it's either talking to them directly or knowing who they are, and I'll explain more about what I mean by knowing who they are in line of sight in a minute. But the idea is person of authority, understanding who has the authority to make a decision is critical to playing a game called Make a Decision. yet it's a thing that gets pushed to the back so often. I don't like the term decision maker. I don't let people use it because it's a fuzzy word, right? I would sort of joke and say everybody's a decision maker. Most of the time they decide to put on clothes before they leave the house in the morning and go to the office, right? The problem with the term decision maker is it creates fuzziness for us and allows the prospect to be fuzzy in their thinking about what's required to make a decision, right? Selling is about a process that leads to a decision. Somebody has to make a decision at a moment in time. The stuff I have up on here are just some of the many hundreds, if not thousands, of variants of explanations I've heard over the years coaching teams about who they're talking to. They're the person who signs the contract. So what? I'm going to show you an example in a minute about why that doesn't necessarily matter. They're part of the decision team. That means nothing. I get the concept, but it does not provide clarity on whether or not you can enter in a game called make a decision. It's in their budget. Again, budget doesn't mean decision. Well, rather than going through all these, I'll just say that the term decision maker sucks, doesn't work. So I'm going to give you an alternative. I'm going to give you a better plan. I use the term person of authority, and I'll just pop this up here for now. Person of authority is the individual who possesses, right, has the authority, authorization, sanction, right, to make a decision. Not the ability to make a decision, but the authority, right? Anybody in an organization can make a decision. Few are authorized to do so. You know, when you get to that person who says, yeah, I'm the decision maker, I make the decision, blah, 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 I'm the one. Then 6 months later, after you've spent all your money and time, and it comes down time to sign the contract, they say, well, actually, I just got to run it by my boss real quick. Were they a decision maker? Well, yeah, they were a decision maker. Did they lie to you? No, you accepted some fuzzy words. You didn't ask the right questions. Don't blame them. Take accountability. I want you to imagine taking this statement and flipping it into a question. It is very difficult to get squirrely if I ask you, Noah, great conversation, I'm looking forward to keeping going, blah, blah, blah. I can ask you directly, do you possess the authority to make a decision to move forward with purchasing my services for your company without asking anybody else? That's a direct question. Very difficult to squirrel out of that, isn't it? But yet, as soon as I start poking and prodding on opportunities, I find that the question's not being asked. So, the game called Make a Decision, right, requires access to a POA, a person of authority. And again, don't worry, I'll talk about what if we don't get to the POA, what happens there, right, because we don't always talk to the real person with authority. That's fine. But it requires access to a POA and mutual commitments because we have to be in a relationship. What are these commitments that will take us from wherever we are today to this thing called a decision? Well, we need some sort of plan of stuff that's going to happen, right? If somebody says, I'm the POA, well, then we have to say, generally speaking, how would you like to go about making your decision? Well, I want to see your stuff, I want to talk to some references, whatever. What's interesting is the plan to make a decision is actually far less important than you think. Remember, a decision is a moment in time, and most often, people with authority to make a decision to invest, to buy stuff from you, don't actually have a formalized decision process, and that's okay. Don't stress about it. But you want to make sure you've thought through the plan on some level. You also need ground rules, right? One good ground rule is we'll never leave a meeting without an next scheduled. Another good ground rule is don't ever ask me to follow up with you. We, as professionals, meet on a calendar. Whatever your rules are, right? You can articulate those. Sandler has a great thing they've used for years called the upfront contract, right? That's just a series of ground rules, right? Don't leave me hanging on a meeting, right? I won't blow you off without notice, and you don't do the same. Finally, and most importantly, playing a game called Let's Make a Decision requires a decision meeting. Literally, without any hyperbole or sugarcoating, once I have gotten the prospect to agree that they want to move from play to game, the next thing I will do is close them on a decision meeting. Thanks so much, Bob. I'm glad we're going to be playing a game called Make a Decision. How long would you like to take to make the decision? Well, what do you mean? Well, let me tell you what I mean. I doubt you're going to decide tomorrow. That would be weird. And I'm pretty sure neither you or I wants to be talking in a year about this. So for something like this, how long, generally speaking, do you think it's reasonable to peg as our decision time frame? Let's create this game, and let's figure out a date and time at which we know the game is over. Right? So, we're talking about blah, blah, blah. How about a month? Well, I think a month and a half makes sense. Great. It's February 14th. Let's just say March 30th. Here's what I'm going to do, Bob. I'm going to send you a meeting invite for March 14th. It's going to be called decision meeting. And that'll be the date that you and I are both tracking towards, on which you will tell me either, yes, you're moving forward in purchasing my services, or no, you're not. And either answer is fine, but at least we have a date and stand. Now, what happens if we're running behind? Well, we'll move the date. That's why there's overtime. But the fundamental problem with what most people represent to be selling is that they're just having a conversation. There's no end point, right? You can't have a decision time frame, right? You can't be said to be in a game called Let's Make a Decision unless you've both agreed when the game ends. So if you actually look in the pipelines of the teams that I'm managing now, in order to get to engaged or 50% probability, one of the requirements is they need to have, A, asked the prospect to play a game called Let's Make a Decision. They need to confirm it's the person of authority. And they need to have in their calendar, accepted by the prospect, a decision meeting, a date on which the decision will be rendered. It sounds so simple, and it is, and obvious, and it is, but it is incredibly powerful in transforming this thing we call selling from something you do to the prospect, and we kind of keep doing until one of us goes, okay, I guess we'll buy maybe, to an intentional, time-bound process called a decision, right? I prefer a game called Let's Make a Decision. Hope this is making sense. Hope you guys are getting a couple ahas out of here, because this is pretty cool stuff. So how do we know we're in game? How do we get commitment? How do we ensure there's a commitment there, right? Because I said commitments need to be mutual. Well, you have to ask for one. You can't assume it. How do you know you have a decision meeting? Well, we're going to meet later. I assume they're going to make a decision. No, that's not a decision making. A decision making is when you asked the prospect for a specific date and time that they are committed to rendering a decision by. Whatever happens between now and then will happen, right? But on that date, we'll make a decision. Another way to ensure commitment is confirmation emails, right? For me, confirmation in writing of what we've agreed to verbally is an absolute critical part of the sales process. Not only is it what good professionals do, it's how we keep from making a lot of missteps, right? An email is verifiable evidence. I'm not talking about in a court of law. I'm talking about in terms of, to your sales manager, to your VP, frankly, even to yourself. How do you know what you think happened, right? The power of the written word is 10x over the spoken word. And that's not a scientific fact, that's my opinion. But we all know that what we hear is open, well, anything we sense is open to interpretation, but certainly what we hear is highly subject to interpretation. And in a selling process, right, in a sales dance game, right, we're motivated to hear good things and unmotivated to hear bad things. So what we want to do is eliminate what some call happy ears, right? I'll get off a call with a prospect, coaching or listening in on a salesperson, and their interpretation of what happened will be very different than mine because they, are accountable for that deal. They want the deal to close. They get commission. They tend to hear things far more positively than I do, right? And then I kind of rain on their parade a little bit. When you're talking about confirmation emails, I'm going to show you two examples in a second. Brevity, briefness, shortness, and clarity are key. I have a whole other session I do on how do you write emails in 2017, but the reality is most people write these long essays that don't ever get read. Here's the punchline. Email todays are read on mobile devices. Think of emails as how people deal with Tinder. Swipe right, swipe left, except with emails, it's click on it and do something now, delete now, or scroll down, do something later, right? Delete now sucks. We all know that. Do something now is what you want. Act now. Act later is death. Act later means tonight, this weekend, next year, 200 more emails came in. So don't be that email. Subject line matters. The number one correlator with email open rate is the power of the subject line, the clarity of the subject line. So last thing on these things is request and confirmation. Let me show you what I mean. This is a crappy recap email. Give you a second to read it. I'm not going to. Blue is where I put the things that matter. Please correct me if I'm wrong, which is a very weak way of saying I need a response saying we're on the same page or not. And Mac Ingmar, blah, 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 will sign off on the contract is weak for two reasons. Number one, it's worded poorly. Sign off on the contract, that's very fuzzy. Number two, it's at the end of the third bullet, right? Why would you put the most important piece of information at the end of the email hidden? Well, the answer is you're scared that it's not going to be the truth. And that's the reality. Is a lot of times the reason we shy away from clarity around the person of authority is we sort of know we're not really there, right? And we don't want to admit that we're playing a game called Make a Decision, possibly with somebody who can't actually make a decision, right? You guys will have the presentation. You can look at this on your own time if you want. But here's an example of a good recap. First of all, subject, meeting recap, please reply. That's an actionable email. I need you to hit reply and say, yes, we're good, or no, we're not, right? Here are our notes. Please send a reply indicating these are accurate or correct. Number one, Dr. Robert Myers has authority to make a decision to move forward with my company, blah, blah, blah. First one. The rest of the stuff doesn't really matter. It's more details. The point is, this is something that if true, the prospect will hit reply and say, yep, you got it. Or, no, actually, it has to go up to our, chairman of the board, whatever, right? This is pretty unequivocal, but this is the kind of confirmation email you need to be putting out after every single conversation when you're in game, right? You don't need to send confirmation emails in play because this is play. If we're progressing towards the conclusion of a game called Let's Make a Decision, this stuff is critical. Now, in teams that I'm coaching and managing, it's critical because I don't actually give you credit for anything that doesn't have a recap email. You can tell me all you want, this is a POA. If you don't have an email like this, I don't believe you, right? I believe that you believe you, but I don't believe you. So I don't trust you. I don't believe you. So let's talk about closing, right? Which is what y'all paid your $20 to learn how to do, right? If you knit all this together, you actually have a list for this thing formerly known as closing, right? A very simple way to approach closing, now called consummating, right? Because that's more fun. But here's what you do. The first question you ask yourself is, am I in relationship with the prospect? Do I have a commitment? If you've sent a proposal out to the prospect because they've asked, and your next thing to do is, quote unquote, follow up next week, are you in a relationship? No, you have exited the game because you've exited a relationship because you no longer have a commitment. You've gone to, I'm chasing you. You are not in relationship with that prospect. You have basically stepped out of the game and lost any connectivity. Bad. Don't do it. You have an next scheduled, right? Are you playing the game? Are you in relationship, actually, with the person of authority, or do you have line of sight to that person of authority? Again, 2 more minutes, and I'll tell you what do we do when we don't always get to the person of authority. But you have to know who it is, and you have to know the relationship between who you're talking to and the person of authority. It can't just be, well, the chairman of the board makes a decision, I don't even know him, or my contact doesn't know him, but we'll get to him when we need to, right? That's not playing a game called Make a Decision. That's called playing. Has the person you are in a relationship with agreed formally to play a game called Make a Decision to Purchase, ... How will you know if they've agreed to play the game? Well, then there will be a decision date, and there will be a scheduled decision meeting. This is it. This is all you need to do to close a deal, right? Now, when I say closing or consummating, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, right? But the goal is to get to a decision. It's not to get somebody to do something they don't want to do. It's to get to a decision versus no decision versus we talk. So if you've done all things, then all you do is you play the game. You play the game called Let's Make a Decision. I'm going to show you some stuff. You're going to ask some stuff. We're going to meet. The list of things you do in the game called Make a Decision are actually blatantly obvious, right? Because if we're playing a game called Make a Decision, I have to ask you, what do you need to make a decision? What information do you need? What kind of criteria will we be using to make? I have to ask questions about your decision, not conceptual questions about, your theories and goals and blah, blah, blah. And now we move to making a decision. All right, now the point you've all been waiting for. What happens when you have no direct access to POA? Because that's going to happen, right? You're talking to somebody who has been delegated by somebody else to go figure this out. That's very normal. I'm not one of those that obsesses about get to the C level, get to the decision maker. Sometimes you can. Frankly, For a lot of stuff, whatever we're selling is not on the executive who has the authority to make a decision's radar. They don't care, right? They do have to be swayed, they have to make a decision, but you're not going to be having that conversation. It's just going to happen. So, as we think about selling through versus selling to, the only difference to our model, which I showed you a couple slides of, was in addition to the decision meeting with a non-POA, right, which is our decision meeting, there's another thing in here called the POA decision. I have it as a black box because most often that's what it is. When a salesperson I'm coaching says, yep, I've got a meeting with my non-POA, they got to go talk to the POA. And I say, well, what does that look like? They go, I don't really know. Well, first of all, is it going to happen before you're meeting with them? Because they need a decision in order to make a decision. So that would be good to know. Are they actually going to talk to them ahead of time? But there's a whole bunch of stuff that we got to understand in order to represent that we're actually playing a game called make a decision. If you're simply talking to somebody who's not a POA and has no idea how they're going to move it through the POA to the POA, what are you doing? Well, you're actually putting together budgetary numbers is what we call that, right? You're not actually working a deal. You're helping a stakeholder build a case for something they'd like to do in the future, but you're not selling, right? That's not bad or wrong. It just ain't going to close this year or maybe in your lifetime. I don't know. So the point is, if this is in fact what's happening, they are going to go talk to the POA. They have a relationship with the POA. They are going to ask the POA to make a decision that empowers them to make a decision. Then you need to understand what goes on in the black box. It can't be a black box for you. So who are you going to talk to? When are these conversations going to happen, right? You ever have a prospect say, yeah, I'm going to bring it up in the staff meeting? That's a major red flag, folks. That means it's a surprise to the POA. We're kind of running it by them and seeing what they think. Guess what? You're not in a sales process. You're not in a game called make a decision. You're in a game called let's have a lot of talk about something that might or might not ever happen. Again, that's not wrong or right. That's not bad or good. It just means you don't live in my pipeline. That's not a pipeline forecastable opportunity. That's stuff you're doing that you hope someday turns into a deal. That's your right as a salesperson. It just doesn't go in my pipeline, right? How exactly will you communicate to the POA? How will they make a decision? By the way, are they even expecting the conversation? You're talking to me about purchasing blah, blah, blah SaaS stuff, right? You say you got to go talk to your CTO. Is this the first he's going to be, when you go and say, hey, I want to buy this, is that the first he's hearing about it or she's hearing about it? If so, guess what? You're not working an opportunity. You're playing. And again, nothing wrong with play, but it's not a real opportunity. It can't be forecast. You can certainly work on it, and it could turn into something, but it's kind of going to be luck. I hope that makes sense. You guys have questions, feel free to ask. I'm trying to keep us on track here. What about broken commitments, right? Because we say that being in relationship is a function of commitments. What about when people break commitments, right? Example, a missed meeting. You ever had it happen maybe once or twice or 100 times where the prospect's supposed to be there for a proposal review or a demo and they don't show up? So you were in relationship because they'd committed to be at the meeting. They didn't show up. Guess what? You are now out of relationship. Call it what you want. They could be sick, could be blowing you off intentionally, something important. It doesn't really matter. You are now out of relationship, period. You have to acknowledge you're no longer in relationship. Again, not bad, not good, not right, not wrong, but a fact, a truth, a reality that you must address. Because if you are not in relationship, you are no longer playing the game called make a decision. The prospect has exited the game just as much as the dude on the basketball cart has walked up and says, I'm going home for dinner. They are no longer in that game. I don't care what you say. Unless you have a commitment, they're not in game. It's very simple. The first thing you must do is get back in relationship. You don't write them long letters. You don't send them more stuff. You don't continue trying to find references for them. You basically say, hey, man, we had a meeting. You missed it. When can we get back on the calendar? I actually have a process I use. It's 3 separate emails to get the prospect back in game. If you guys go to LinkedIn, you'll see one of the things I have there is the ultimate guide to ending no-shows, and there's the get back on the calendar sequence, which are basically 3 emails I use to get the prospect back in game, back in relationship. Once you are back in relationship, then we can renegotiate the commitment. Hey, we missed this. Hey, we're tracking to a decision timeline here, right? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to get back on track? Or are we? Or are we going to adjust the decision timeline? If the prospect walks off the playing field, they stop playing the game. If they stop playing the game and you send them a couple formal email requests saying, hey, let's get back in playing, and they don't respond, and you should know if they respond or not, because now these days I can see if you open my email or not, right? I can use Tout App, or heck, even Salesforce does it. If you're not using these things, you're insane. But if I send you 3 emails saying we need to get rescheduled, here's specific times, and you don't respond, right? Guess what it is? It's game over. John, you asked a great question, right? People set a meeting and you cannot get back in touch with them. Guess what? They're done, right? Put another coin and go talk to somebody else, either in that company or another company, but stop pretending you're playing a game, right, with somebody who's exited the game, right? Can you play tennis when the other person walks off the court? No, you just keep hitting balls over there and they don't go anywhere. It's absurd. Yeah, Noah has a good point, but he's my only prospect. Yeah, that's why you need to learn how to prospect, right? But continuing to chase people that don't want to play a game with you anymore is absurdity. Unfortunately, it's what a lot of sales professionals do, right? They continue to trick themselves or delude themselves into saying, no, this person's really serious. We have a great relationship, but they won't call you back, but they won't follow through on their commitments, etc. Huh? Think about that. So moving on, because one of the things I want to talk about, and I said I would talk about, is contracting and procurement, right? So what happens after the decision, right? On the decision date, one of 3 things happen. They say yes, they say no, we move the decision date, right? We're not ready to make a decision yet. Okay, let's move it, right? All those are fine. John asked the question, does this fall under the 10 times call and then give up? Actually, no, John. The 10 times is in prospecting, trying to get the first scheduled meeting. If we have entered into a game called Make a Decision, and you miss a meeting, I actually have 3 emails I send to you. I will only put those 3 emails out, and then I'm recycling you. You're done. I'll call you in 6 months and see where you're at. But I'm not going to waste 10 calls on somebody who walked off the playing field. Good question. So what happens after the decision meeting? Well, contracting and procurement is really just another opportunity to invite the prospect to play a game. It's a different game. It's a game called, let's get this contract signed. One of the most unacceptable circumstances for me is they have contracts, we'll get them when we get them. It's unacceptable, right? Here's why. On the day those contracts are signed, when they finally show up in my inbox, even if it's 6 months late, the prospect's going to start pounding their fist on the table and say, where's my stuff, right? Where's my services? Where's my software? How come it's not done? You got the contracts. Well, you're asking me to deliver, commit to a go-live date, support your launch, whatever. But if you're not willing to commit to a contract date, a date on which I'll have the contracts in my box, well, I can't commit to you then. So getting the prospect to play a game called, let's get those contracts signed by March 31st so we can hit the go live by July 30th is just another game with meetings, right? You agree on an end date, you agree on the ground rules. Okay, so we're going to try to get this done in a month and a half. I know you got to talk to procurement, and they're kind of cagey. I know you got to deal with legal, and they're kind of hard to deal with, but I'm asking you to make a commitment to do everything in your power to get this contract signed by the 31st so that I can fulfill in my commitment to you to go live by July 30th. Will you make that commitment? Yes, I will. Great. First thing we're going to do, we're going to put a contract confirmation meeting on the calendar for, whatever I said, March 31st. On that day, we'll meet at noon. I'll be calling you to confirm that I have those contracts in my inbox with the appropriate signatures, the scans came through, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the meeting invite. Boom. By the way, let's not wait till then. Let's put a contract check-in meeting on the calendar for, let's say March 1st, see how we're doing. How does that sound? Great. Now we're in relationship. You're in relationship with your prospect and playing a game called, let's get these damn contracts signed, right? Because we have commitments. We have meetings. Make sense? Hope so. What about selling faster, right? Accelerating the sales cycle. Where does that fit in all this? Well, I got some bad news for you. Opportunities don't have a velocity, right? A car goes 60 miles an hour. An opportunity has no speed. It's a nonsensical term. How do we sell faster? Well, what's the current velocity of our sales Well, most people can't even tell you how long a sale typically takes, much less how fast it's going, right? Sales cycle is different than speed. So things without velocity can't be sped up. I can accelerate my car, I can't accelerate a deal. But the good news is I can renegotiate dates. The key is you cannot renegotiate a date that hasn't been negotiated. So what a lot of people try to do is see if they can hurry up the sale when they haven't locked the prospect in on a decision date. I'll give you an example. If I'm coming up to the end of the year and I want to close it before the end of the year, the sales manager will usually rub their hands together and say, so what can we do to close this faster? Can we offer them a deal? Right? And then the salesperson goes to the prospect and says, hey, we'll give you an incentive. If you close by the end of the year, we'll give you 25% off. And the prospect goes, that's awesome. And then the year rolls around and it just doesn't get done. And somehow the contract gets in by about January 30th. And the prospect goes, yeah, by the way, you're going to give me the discount anywhere. I won't buy. And you knuckle under because you always do, because you want the deal, don't you? You're not going to stand there and take it away. That's a bad approach. You want to close a deal by the end of the year. The first thing you do is you lock the prospect into their decision timeline. Okay, you're going to make a decision on January 15th. That's fine, right? Relax. Now, I can suggest an alternate set of decision and contract dates that adjust to my need with the discount, but I have to first have the original timeline in place. If you don't have a decision meeting on the calendar, it's impossible to move it forward because the prospect has never agreed to a decision. I hope that makes sense. It's a little more complex and don't have a lot of time to cover that today, but fundamentally, in order to get deals done sooner, you follow this process, and then if there are financial incentives you can offer and the prospect is willing to move those dates, decision date, contract date, right? Notice nowhere does it say close date because nobody cares about that. If they're willing to move those dates, then you can negotiate an agreement that says, if you're able to move these dates, I can provide a financial incentive because it's in my best interest to do so. All right, last but not least, I wanted to show you real quickly, and again, you'll get a copy of the presentation, you'll get the recording because I'm talking fast, but I want to show you how these concepts relate directly to pipeline stages, i.e. what stage and probability do we call these things in the pipeline, and then I'm going to blow your noodle by showing you the results this model has delivered in the past 12 months. So this is my stage model. Every deal starts in prospect, 0%, which means it's not on my radar, right? A $100,000 deal forecast at zero probability is $0. I don't care about it. That's your business as a salesperson. I'm happy to coach you on it. I will never bring it up in a pipeline review, okay? In order to get to qualified, meaning we call it 20%, it's a 20% probability of closing. You need to have line of sight to the person of authority and next scheduled meeting, which means I'm going to ask, who's person of authority? How do you know? Do you have a confirmation email? If you're selling through somebody, I'm going to ask about that relationship. But if you have those two things, you are now a qualified opportunity. Well, that's easy, Townsend. I'll just keep everything at prospect. Well, I don't know about that because as a salesperson, if we're meeting every week and you have nothing in your pipeline, I'm going to fire you, right? I'm not just going to hope one day that deals come in, right? So you have to move things forward in the pipeline to demonstrate that you're progressing towards your goal, but you got to follow the rules. So once you're qualified to get to engage, which is just a word I use, you need evidence of the POA, meaning email trail. You need agreement to play the game, meaning that you've asked and they've said they're going to play a game called Make a Decision, and the evidence of that game is a scheduled decision meeting, right? So if you have a scheduled decision meeting in your opportunity, I know you've got a 50% probability of closing. The glib answer to why is because I know you're going to get a yes or a no. That's 50-50. Funny about that. In order to move to committed, that means that you have hit the decision date and you've received a decision in the affirmative to purchase blah, blah, blah. Contracting and procurement may still need to occur, but I'm going to need to see some sort of email confirmation that says, looking forward to working together, glad you made a decision. Here are our contracts, and we'll talk about how to make that happen, blah, blah, blah. Now you're committed 80%. In order to be at 90% contracting, I want to see on your calendar that you have a contract confirmation date, meaning a date on which the prospect has agreed to talk for 10 or 15 minutes and confirm that the contract has been sent. This crap about I send you a contract and follow up, or somebody says, oh yeah, they said they'll have the contract on Friday, and it's Friday afternoon, everybody's stressing and sweating because we don't know if it's going to come in or not. That's nonsense. You put a meeting on the calendar, right? You say to your prospect, hey, I'm excited the contract's coming in this week. Thank you for doing this. You think it's Friday? Yes, great. What do you think, by noon? Is that reasonable? Yeah, great, let's do this. I'm going to send you a meeting request for what we call a contract confirmation meeting. Let's make it at 1 o'clock. It'll be 15 minutes. I'll call you real quick and say, hey, got the contract. Signatures look good. The little initials on the bottom look good. We're good to go. And, you know, we'll be able to both rest easy over the weekend. It's so easy to do. Question from Jeff. Are most presentations demos given at the qualified stage before engaged? Well, that's a great question. What I find is people give presentations and demos too early, often without even being qualified. What I'll also tell you is in this model, I don't care, right? I used to say, don't do the presentation, Bob. You have to follow these steps. And it was a very binding model, you know. And the problem is it didn't give enough autonomy for the salesperson to do what they thought was best in the moment. What I say now is I don't care what you do when. You just need to know if you're in a relationship or not, and if you're playing or if you're in game. And at some point I might say to you, hey, I've been noticing a pattern here, and that is you're not getting a lot of opportunities to game. Maybe that's because in play, not in relationship, you're giving away all the goods. You're telling them everything they want, giving them pricing proposals. I just did a deal review last week with a gentleman who's done, you know, I don't know, 2 demos, at least 1 proposal, sent pricing over. He doesn't even know who the person of authority is. He wanted to talk at length about why this made sense, why this is how it works. I said, I don't really care. It's at prospect 0%. You have nothing in the pipeline. I hope you get something in the pipeline. You're wasting your time in my mind, right? You're literally wasting your time. You might as well go to Starbucks and start doing demos. But that's his right. So, as I said, the goal of forecasting is predictability, right? It's not for me to be right and you to be wrong. It's not for anything other than determining whether things are going to close. So the question you have to ask is, how good is this, you know, what I would call very simple, very powerful, but, you know, fancy new model? How well does it predict? How well does it enable salespeople to actually know whether they're spending time on the right things or not? I'll let you be the judge. These are the actual results from approximately 100 deals in the last 12 months. Right? Deals that are at qualified, reach qualified by my model should close at 20%, meaning if you get to qualified, they should close 1 in 5 times. This process is actually running 27%, so we're beating the model. Engaged should be at 50%, we're closing 53%. Committed should be 80, it's 82, and contracting should be 90 to 95. Bottom line is this model is dead nuts, deadly effective at predicting revenue, right? You follow this model, you will know if you're going to close business or not with better certainty than anything else that exists out there. I'm pretty excited about that, right? Because when I started with this, it made sense, but I wasn't really sure if it's going to work. Turns out it does. So it's kind of fun. All right, with that, I'll leave you with something that hangs on my wall, actually. By the way, this is an original quote of mine. I have had a graphic designer work it up. If any of you guys want one of these, I actually can, I get them printed on this, print on canvas in a frame. I have a big 5-foot by 3-foot one right over my TV. It sits in my living room, so it reminds me to stop worrying. It will all get done, and tomorrow there will be more. If anybody's interested, shoot me an email. I'll tell you what it'll cost, whatever size you want. I don't make any money on them. I don't, you know, profit from it, but this is my mantra, so I figured I'd share it. With that, I'm going to open up to any questions. I'm going to keep it on mute. I actually can, there's some way that I can, you know, get people to unmute them. But the idea is if you have a question, kind of just let me know the question, and I may even just unmute you. Somebody said, where are the emails in LinkedIn? The question is, what are you looking for? Well, if you go to my LinkedIn page and if you go to, you know, where it says Townsend's Posts, there's one that's called Stop No-Shows Forever or something. By the way, if you shoot me an email, I'll just send you the direct link to the thing, or maybe I'll just put it in the, that's what I'll do. I'm going to, when I send out the recording of this webinar, I'm going to also send a link to a Dropbox, which has all the folders, the presentation, etc. I'll put that article in the Dropbox so it's right there as a kind of bonus for you guys. You don't have to go look for it. So there's your answer for that one. I'll send it out for you. Actually, somebody was kind enough to put the link, though, so you can get it even sooner. What are the questions you guys have about this? Silence. One of the challenges of always doing these large group ones, and it's better when people can just talk. But anybody got a question, just raise your hand. I'll figure out how to unmute you. How about that? I have been so complete and thorough that there are no questions on my presentation. All right, good. What success stories do people have using your method? Well, I guess I would point to the fact that, the percentages, the actual conversion rates of revenue speak for themselves, right? When you can convert deals to closed ones at that level of predictability, that's a huge win. However, for me, one of the great things about this approach is that it gives you a very prescriptive means of pursuing an opportunity, right? The biggest challenge with a lot of opportunities is, what do I do next, right? Where do I go from here? Well, this model is pretty simple, right? Just like I said in terms of the model for closing, if you're not in a relationship, get in relationship, right? Get a next scheduled meeting, right? There's lots of articles and techniques I have on my, my LinkedIn post and on my website about how you get in the meeting, but you got to get back in the meeting. If the prospect has not agreed to play a game called Make a Decision, you need to ask them to make a decision. Ask them to play this game called Make a Decision. How do you ask them? Well, that might take a little practice, but it's not that hard. You literally say, would you like to make a decision? How long would you like to take? You negotiate, etc. How does the conversation go in your head in getting from non-POA to POA? Well, first I want to be clear that the goal is not to get to the POA. The goal is to know who the POA is and how that works. So the first thing you got to ask somebody is, who in this company, whatever we're talking about, has the authority to make a decision to move forward with, purchasing blah, blah, blah from my company? When they say, well, I make a decision, the answer is great. Do you have to ask anybody else? And they say, well, I got to ask Bob, my boss. Does he have to ask anybody else? Well, I don't think so. Okay, well, let's do this. Let's make that an action item, because I think you'd agree it's important we both know how a decision would be made if we're playing a game called Make a Decision. So we'll keep talking, but as an assignment between now and next time, I'm going to, in our recap, put down there that you need to go and double check and see if Bob has to ask anybody else, because we both need to know that, don't we? Right? We don't want to be scared of asking that. So that's an example. How do you get to the decision maker? I'm not sure you people are listening. I'll say it again. You don't have to get to the decision maker. You have to know who it is, and the way you know who it is, you ask a question. What if the person doesn't know the answer? Right? Because sometimes that does happen. Right? Well, I'm not really sure. Okay, go ask. Well, I don't want to ask, or I'm scared to ask, or why do I have to ask? Right? One of the questions you guys maybe should be asking is, what do you do when you get pushback from the person saying, well, we're going to keep it between you and I? My response is, hey, no problem. I'm not trying to get around you. However, we're both sane human beings. We're not crazy, right? Therefore, it would not make a lot of sense for you and I to invest 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 12 months on this and then find out that the person who we need to make a decision isn't willing to make a decision. So in both of our interests, we, and by we I mean you, need to figure out who makes a decision and make sure that you're talking to them. If you want my help, I'll go with you, but I don't have to. Right? There's a lot of obsession with getting to the decision maker. Right? You need to know who it is, and you need to enroll your prospect in the importance of identifying the decision maker and getting them, aware of what's going on. One of my clients, leading up to implementing this process, I don't know, I'm going to exaggerate, but it was a 70 or 80% rate of getting, quote unquote, to the decision, and then finding out they weren't talking to somebody who was able to make a decision, and the deal died. The definition of insanity is doing the same stupid shit over and over again, thinking you get a different result. Right? Good question. I'm doing well on the front end, getting in front of people, and struggle with closing and getting commitment. Well, the first question is, are you asking for a commitment, right? John, what I would say is, sounds like you're good at play, right? The free-form conversation. You simply need to ask your prospect a very direct question. Would you like to move from play to a game called Let's Make a Decision as to whether or not you guys want to move forward with this? If they don't want to play that game, they don't want to play that game. They just want to play, and that's fair too. You have to accept that and go talk to somebody else. How long would you spend playing tag with somebody who, it was obvious, didn't want to play frickin' tag? They're just standing there, right? You wouldn't keep saying, you know, gosh, this is so unfair. You go find somebody else to play with, right? So that's really important. How does the conversation go in your head and getting from non-POA to POA? Again, I think I understand, Ray, but the concept is, Randy, you don't need to get to the POA. First of all, identify the POA, and then make sure there's a plan to integrate them, right? Somebody has to go talk to the POA. So I could say something like, all right, you've told me that your boss makes the decision. First question, does your boss know about our conversation? Does he even know you're looking at blah, blah, blah that I'm selling? Well, no. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Doesn't seem like a good idea to me, does it? Right? Because bosses usually have a set of priorities that they care about, and then we come along and say, I want to do something, and they don't want to do it, they don't do it, do they? So before we waste a lot of time, you and me, pretending that we're going to get something accomplished, we need to go to your boss and say, hey, if I bring you a business case and a compelling reason to do this, is this something you would invest in? We need to have provisional consent. If the prospect's not willing to do that, you're talking to a crazy person. Either call around them or stop talking to them, but stop wasting your time. Do you have info on personality types and how they affect communication? No, because I don't care. And that sounds really glib, but I have studied all the major personality, behavioral assessment types. You use them for hiring, et cetera, et cetera. Those are nuances, right? How people communicate, introvert, extrovert, ASPD, whatever the various categories are. Those things are nuances. In reality, the thing about this model, which to me is so powerful, is it's dumbass simple, right? However you need to communicate with somebody, you are either in relationship or you are not in relationship with them. I don't care if you get along with them. I don't care how much of a fit you are. If you are not in relationship, you cannot get in game. If you are not in game with them, you are playing, go talk to people at Starbucks. Good question. Any difference between product versus services? No, absolutely not. I didn't think there would be going into it, but I actually looked at that quite a bit. And in reality, product and service sales have different nuances as to the stuff. But in terms of this framework, one of the things I love about it is it applies universally. I've got customers with products and services, and they're all using it, and it works. Weak okay, I'm trying to string this one together here. Screeners, roadblockers. I think you kind of mean gatekeepers, right? Which is not the topic of this, right? If you're talking to an executive assistant who won't let you get to the CTO, now, interesting thought. I hadn't really applied this, but you can get in relationship with an executive assistant. Hey, let's meet next Tuesday. And you can ask the executive assistant to enter into a game with you called Let's Make a Decision about whether or not you're going to let me talk to so-and-so, right? Understand their process for vetting vendors, vetting people, and play that game with them. That's a longer conversation, but that's probably the best I can do in a quick Q&A. Yes, you will get a recorded version of this. We'll be sending that out along with a Dropbox with some goodies. Does this put you in an advantage or disadvantage when vetting multiple solutions? Great question. I would say unequivocally puts you at an advantage. Now, the one exception, of course, is this nonsense called RFPs, and frankly, RFPs are a waste of time, and anybody who responds to RFPs who hasn't written the RFP and who's not selling for the government, sorry, my one caveat, is wasting their time and should probably find a new career because you actually don't understand how the world works, sorry. But the definition of an RFP is not in relationship, right? It's no commitments that you will do whatever I say. You can't get in game. However, If you are in a competitive situation, which makes a lot of sense, in a non-RFP competitive situation, it's an incredible advantage, right? You're the only one of all the other vendors who's trying to move the prospect to a decision. You will come across as professional, as knowledgeable, and unless your solution sucks or you're not credible, they're going to buy from you, because most of those folks are kind of bumbling along with a half-assed sales process they don't understand, chucking stuff over the wall. When you lead the prospect towards a decision, it commands respect. It builds credibility. It's just there's no other way around it. So hope that makes sense. All right. Any more questions? I think you guys got a lot out of it. I'm psyched. I'll be sending the, whatever you call it, the recording out a little bit later with a link to a Dropbox with some goodies in it. And if you guys need anything, you know, reach me via email. You can hit reply on any ones you got. I'll try to help, and really hope you guys got a lot out of it today. Thanks so much for joining.